Adrian's shattered phone lay glowing beneath my boot, its screen pulsing with my unanswered calls. I stopped before my weight finished coming down. Snow packed the porch boards in thin white seams, and the wind pushed a dry whisper through the pines behind the house. On the screen, beneath a web of cracks, my name appeared again, Evan calling. The device had landed face up near the steps, but pieces of its black case were scattered 6 feet away beside a toppled flower pot. I crouched and picked it up. The glass bit cold into my fingertips. Adrian. My voice traveled through the open front door and disappeared. No answer came back. I had driven nearly 4 hours after months of silence, rehearsing accusations at every red light. Adrian had stopped answering in September. No argument. No goodbye. 1 week he was sending me blurry pictures of burned pancakes. The next, every call went to voicemail. I had told myself I only wanted proof he was alive. Standing there with his broken phone in my hand, I could no longer pretend that was the whole reason. Warm amber light spilled from the windows across the snow. His truck sat under the cedar awning with frost silvering the windshield, so he had not driven away recently. A porch lamp buzzed above me. The front door shifted on its hinges each time the wind struck it, opening 2 inches, then settling back with a soft wooden knock. "It's Evan," I called. "I know I should have warned you." The words sounded absurd inside the empty hallway. Adrian's boots stood beside the mat, both streaked with mud that had not yet dried. His dark winter coat hung from a wall hook, dripping onto the hardwood. Wherever he was, he had come inside without either of them. I crossed the threshold. The house smelled of cedar smoke, coffee, and something sharp underneath, medicinal, almost metallic. Heat breathed from the floor vents, but the cold from outside clung to my jeans and tightened the skin across my knuckles. Nothing in the living room looked disturbed. A book rested open on the arm of the couch. 1 lamp burned beside it. 2 logs shifted in the fireplace with a hollow pop, sending sparks behind the mesh screen. "Adrian." I tried again. The kitchen faucet dripped at measured intervals. On the counter sat a mug with a dark ring of coffee at the bottom. Beside it was a plate holding half a sandwich, the bread stiff at the edges but not yet fully dry. Someone had left in the middle of eating, or had been made to leave. I looked back at the doorway. I could still return to my car, drive toward the nearest town, and call the sheriff from somewhere warm and public. That would have been sensible. It also would have meant abandoning Adrian's house the way he had abandoned every message I sent him. I shut the front door instead. The latch failed to catch. When I pushed harder, I found fresh splinters around the strike plate, pale against the dark frame. The door had not been left open. It had been forced. A faint thud came from deeper inside the house. I turned toward the unlit hallway, gripping Adrian's broken phone until the fractured glass pressed into my palm. Another sound followed, slower, heavier, unmistakably a footstep. Then a man's shadow crossed the narrow band of light beneath the door at the end of the hall. The doorknob turned with a soft metallic scrape, and the shadow beneath the door stopped moving. Cold air pressed against my back through the broken front latch, while the wind drove needles of snow across the porch. I raised the shattered phone, though it offered little more protection than a piece of glass. The door opened 6 inches. Adrian stared through the gap. For 1 suspended second, neither of us spoke. His hair was longer than I remembered, curling damply over his forehead, and dark stubble sharpened the hollows beneath his cheekbones. A strip of blood-stained gauze circled his right palm. More blood marked the cuff of his gray thermal shirt. "Evan." My name left him like something pulled from a locked room. He opened the door wider, then moved past me and shoved the front door closed with his shoulder. A brass security bar dropped into brackets he had installed beneath the damaged latch. The house became quiet except for the furnace clicking behind the walls. "Your phone was outside," I said, setting it on the entry table. "Your door was forced." "I know." He crossed to the window and drew the curtain with his uninjured hand. The movement carried a scent toward me, cedar buried beneath something bitter and chemical, like antiseptic spilled over scorched metal. Adrian's alpha scent had once been warm enough to recognize across a crowded room. Now it arrived in broken waves, too sharp, then abruptly absent. A suppressant patch showed above his collar, its edges red against his skin. "How much did you take?" His shoulders locked. "Enough." That isn't an answer. It's the only one you're getting tonight. A gust struck the house hard enough to rattle the window panes. Beyond the glass, snow had erased the tire tracks leading to my car. Adrian looked toward the white blur, then at the keys in my hand. He took them before I could close my fingers. You can't drive back in this. Give those to me. The county road will be buried within the hour. He slipped the keys into his pocket, but his bandaged hand trembled when he lowered it. Fresh red spread through the gauze. I reached for his wrist. Adrian recoiled so quickly that his hip struck the console table, knocking a framed photograph face down. Don't. The word came edged with an alpha command, but the damaged scent behind it made the sound fracture. I held my ground. You disappeared for 4 months. I find your phone smashed, your house broken into, and you bleeding. You don't get to order me around and call that an explanation. His gaze stayed on mine until the furnace kicked on, breathing dry heat across the floorboards. Then he placed my keys on the mantel instead of returning them. You can stay until the plows come through. Guest room upstairs. Food is in the kitchen. He took a flashlight from a drawer and tested its beam. And Evan, listen carefully. A heavy impact sounded somewhere below us. Not in the hallway this time. Under the floor. Dust sifted from the ceiling of the basement stairwell, visible in the flashlight's pale cone. Adrian stepped between me and the narrow door beside the kitchen. His injured hand closed around its dead bolt, leaving a dark smear on the brass. Whatever you hear tonight, he said, turning the lock until it clicked, you do not go into the basement. Then something on the other side dragged slowly across concrete, and Adrian pressed his back against the door as if his weight were the only thing keeping it shut. Wind pressed a low howl through the eaves, and the locked basement door answered with another blunt knock. Adrian's flashlight beam trembled across the brass deadbolt before he pushed away from the door. Upstairs, Evan. He crossed the kitchen, cedar and bitter medicine trailing behind him, then disappeared into the hall without waiting for me to obey. A minute later, pipes groaned behind the walls and the shower began running overhead. I stood beneath the yellow stove light, listening to water drum against porcelain while snow hissed at the windows. Then came a softer sound below, 3 measured taps. A pause. 2 more. Not an animal. Not loose plumbing. I pulled Adrian's broken phone from my pocket and wedged its metal frame beneath the basement door's latch plate. The wood was cold and splintered under my palm. Once, the frame slipped and sliced a bright line across my thumb. The second twist bent the plate outward. On the third, the screws tore free with a crack that vanished beneath the shower. The door opened onto narrow stairs washed in dim amber light. Warm air rose from below, carrying fresh paint, laundry soap, and something faintly sweet beneath the chemical sting lingering throughout the house. Omega Safe Neutralizer. I knew that scent from clinics. Each step complained under my weight. At the bottom, a furnace rattled behind a cinder block wall, but the basement was otherwise empty. No captive, no wounded stranger. The dragging noise came from an unsecured storage bin shifting whenever the furnace kicked on. That answer should have sent me back upstairs. Instead, a strip of light beneath a second door drew me deeper. Its lock required a key, but Adrian had left the screws exposed on the hinges. I found a screwdriver on the workbench and removed them, one by one, surrendering any chance of pretending I had wandered down by mistake. The door sagged into my hands. Beyond it waited a room no one had lived in yet. Soft gray walls. Heavy curtains sealed against outside light. An air purifier whispered beside a neatly made bed, and sealed bottles of water stood beside unscented soap, clean clothes in my size, and suppressant reversal kits arranged inside an unlocked cabinet. On the dresser lay a camera lens cap I had lost 3 summers ago. Above it, photographs covered the wall. Me asleep in the passenger seat during our drive to Montana. Me laughing beneath a diner's red neon sign. Me carrying grocery bags through rain, unaware of a camera across the street. Years of my life, framed through Adrian's eyes. Some images I remembered him taking. Most I did not. My thumb left a red print on the edge of the newest photograph. It showed me outside my apartment 6 weeks earlier, turning towards something beyond the frame. The floorboard behind me creaked. The shower had stopped. Adrian stood in the ruined doorway, damp hair dark against his forehead, his injured hand wrapped in a white towel. His gaze moved from the screwdriver to the photographs, then settled on my bleeding thumb. You built this room for an Omega, I said. His jaw tightened. Evan, come upstairs. I tore the newest picture from the wall and held it between us. You vanished 4 months ago, but this was taken 6 weeks ago. The air purifier hummed into the silence. His distorted alpha scent sharpened, metallic and raw, while the photograph shook once between my fingers and went still. I stepped between Adrian and the stairs, taking away his path of retreat. No more locked doors. Tell me why you've been watching me. Adrian looked past me toward the prepared bed. When his eyes returned to mine, denial was no longer available to him. Because the last time you used your camera, he said quietly, you photographed someone who will kill to make sure you never recognize him. 3 hard knocks traveled through the floorboards, louder than the storm clawing at the roof. Adrian's head snapped toward the basement ceiling. A second blow followed from upstairs, the brass knocker striking the front door. Adrian Vale, a man called through the house. His voice was calm, almost friendly. Send out the witness, and you can keep pretending this place is safe. Adrian moved before I could speak. He tore the photograph from my hand, killed the room's lamp, and guided me behind the concrete wall. Darkness swallowed us except for the purifier's blue indicator. The floor felt icy through my socks, and the medicinal bite of his suppressants thickened the cedar-scented air. Stay here, he whispered. Not this time. I caught his injured wrist. The towel around his palm was already turning red. You said no more locked doors. Footsteps crossed the rooms above us. The intruder was inside. Adrian pulled a compact pistol from behind the medical cabinet, checked it once, then pressed a key ring into my hand. Back exit. 30 feet through the pines. My truck is under a gray tarp. And you? A ceiling joist creaked. Dust sifted onto the prepared bed. I make sure he follows me instead. Before I could stop him, Adrian climbed the stairs and locked the basement door behind him. His boots moved deliberately toward the kitchen. You broke into my home, he called. That's the only mistake you get to walk away from. The stranger answered with a dry laugh. We only want the photographer. My fingers closed around Adrian's keys. Months of silence, the hidden room, the photographs. None of it mattered as much as the sentence Adrian gave him next. Evan isn't yours to take. Glass shattered overhead. I ran. The rear passage opened behind a storage shelf and spilled me into waist-deep snow. Wind drove needles of ice across my face. I found the tarp snapping between the pines, dragged it from an old black pickup, and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine coughed, but did not catch. A dark figure appeared in the doorway behind the house. I leaned on the horn. Its blast tore across the property, pulling the stranger's attention toward me. Then Adrian struck from the side, knocking the man into the snow without firing. He reached the truck as the engine finally roared awake, threw himself into the passenger seat, and slapped the dashboard. Drive. Headlights swept across the house as another vehicle turned into the lane. I forced the pickup through a buried service road while branches scraped both doors. Adrian directed me deeper into the mountain until the pursuing lights vanished behind the white curtain. 10 miles later, an abandoned ranger station emerged among the firs, its windows black and its roof bowed under snow. We barricaded the door with a steel desk and lit a kerosene heater. Orange flame exposed the swelling around Adrian's wounded hand. Who was he? I asked. Adrian stood beside the frosted window, listening to the wind erase our tire tracks. Someone who knows what you saw. Far below, 2 pairs of headlights separated at the fork and began climbing both mountain roads. Adrian checked the pistol, then looked at the single radio on the wall. Its cord had been cut. They aren't searching anymore, he said. They know exactly where we're going. Wind pressed a low moan through the ranger station's warped walls, carrying the smell of pine pitch and frozen iron. Beyond the frosted window, the 2 pairs of headlights disappeared behind the trees, but their engines still growled somewhere below us. I pulled the steel desk tighter against the door. Adrian opened the kerosene heater's dented side panel and removed a black waterproof pouch taped behind it. There's an emergency snowmobile in the shed, he said. 1 seat. Enough fuel to reach the county road. He set my truck keys beside the pouch. Take both. Go north before they close the ridge. And leave you here? They want the witness. If they find me alone, I can convince them you already left. The heater flame fluttered across his face. I unzipped the pouch instead. Inside sat a battered laptop, 3 memory cards, and a stack of shipping labels stained by damp. Tell me what I saw. Adrian's injured fingers tightened around his suppressant patch. Then he peeled it from his neck and dropped it onto the stove. Bitter chemical smoke curled through the room as his true cedar scent surfaced beneath it. I worked for them, he said. The people outside manufacture illegal suppressants. Products strong enough to erase secondary scent, falsify medical screenings, and keep victims dependent. He had managed remote distribution routes, believing the shipments were unlicensed medication until he saw coded ledgers assigning people inventory numbers. After that, he stayed to copy records, buyers, clinics, storage sites, payments. Your photograph connected their leader to one of the shipments, he said. I built the case around it, while deciding for me what I was allowed to know. His gaze fell to the floorboards. Yes. A branch snapped outside, sharp as a rifle crack. Adrian pushed the keys toward me again. You have maybe 20 minutes. I carried the laptop to the station's old map table. Its screen flickered blue, revealing corrupted folders filled with gray thumbnails. Adrian said the memory cards had been exposed to moisture during his escape. Every image recovered as fractured blocks. Then you didn't need someone who could run, I said, taking my camera from its padded bag. You needed a photographer. I connected the camera to the laptop and used its recovery utility to rebuild the cards from their embedded previews. The first pass produced blurred labels. The second restored partial faces. Cold leaked through the floor and numbed my ankles while the laptop fan whined beside the ticking heater. Adrian watched the window until I caught him reaching for the pistol. No, I said. Your hand can barely close. Sort the timestamps. For once, he obeyed. He matched invoices while I corrected color channels and reconstructed missing frames from sequential shots. One image sharpened enough to show a warehouse manifest and 6 clinic addresses. Another revealed account numbers reflected backward in a vehicle window. Adrian leaned over my shoulder, breath catching. That's enough to prove distribution. Not enough to identify the man in my photograph. Evan, you have a way out. I removed the snowmobile key from the ring, walked to the stove, and dropped it through the grate. Plastic hissed against hot metal, filling the room with an acrid sting. So do you, I said. Stop choosing mine for me. His eyes lifted to mine as the engine noise outside grew louder. Then the laptop chimed. The final damaged file had opened, not as a photograph, but as an audio recording with Adrian's voice attached. Its timestamp was from the night he disappeared. The laptop's chime vanished beneath the growl of engines climbing through the storm. Headlights swept between the pines, bleaching the ranger station windows white before darkness swallowed them again. Adrian reached past me and closed the audio file without playing it. They can take the station, he said. They can't take what's no longer here. He connected the laptop to a satellite transmitter buried inside his pack. Its scratched casing clicked against the table while the stove radiated dry heat against my knees. I watched him assemble the recovered photographs, manifests, account records, and clinic addresses into an encrypted archive. Where are you sending it? A federal investigator, 2 reporters, and an attorney holding instructions under my real name. His fingers stopped above the keyboard. Once this leaves, they'll know exactly where the transmission originated. Tires ground over frozen gravel outside. I caught his wrist. The fresh suppressant patch had reddened the skin beneath his sleeve, and his pulse struck hard against my thumb. Then schedule it. We move before it sends. Adrian looked at the melted snowmobile key glowing inside the stove grate. There isn't enough time. He pulled free and entered 3 passwords. A map appeared, showing the ranger station as a blue point blinking against the mountain. Below it sat a directory of everything he had built during 4 years underground. The deed to his house, bank access, vehicle registrations, employment records, and the identity that had allowed him to disappear. The archive is tied to my emergency release protocol, he said. Sending me evidence burns all of this with it. Your house. Seized or destroyed once they trace its ownership. He checked a box beside every account. My savings will fund legal protection for the victims. The vehicles can be tracked. The name I've been using is finished. A heavy door slammed outside, followed by the crunch of boots separating into 2 groups. Adrian removed a small drive from the laptop and snapped it between his palms. Metal bent with a brittle crack. You spent years making that life. I spent years believing silence could keep you outside it. The transmitter found a signal. 1 bar flickered green, then a second. Adrian pressed send. The archive began uploading, each percentage point advancing with a soft electronic chirp. A message appeared confirming that the location beacon had activated. Somewhere beyond the walls, a radio burst into static, and the approaching footsteps changed direction at once. They knew. Adrian opened his phone and remotely erased the security system at his house. Camera feeds blinked out one after another. Porch, kitchen, hallway, basement. The Omega safe room disappeared last, its neatly made bed dissolving into black pixels. Next went his accounts, then the deed, then the documents attached to his protected identity. Red cancellation notices filled the screen while wind shook powder through the window seams. At 97%, the electricity failed. The room dropped into orange stove light, filled with the smell of hot iron and suppressant chemicals. The transmitter continued on battery power. 98. A fist struck the outer door. 99. Adrian stood between me and the entrance. But this time he carried no escape plan, no keys, and no hidden address to return to. The upload reached 100%. Confirmation receipts multiplied across the laptop before its screen dimmed. Outside, an engine roared away downhill, already racing toward the house Adrian had surrendered. Another remained idling near the station. Adrian glanced at the unopened audio file, then slid the laptop toward me. "Everything I owned is gone," he said as the doorframe creaked under a second blow. "But that recording still belongs to you." Cold leaked through the floorboards as the outer door shuddered in its frame, scattering frost from the hinges. The laptop's battery icon glowed red against my hands, and beneath the scrape of boots outside, Adrian's breathing came short and uneven through the chemical scent of damaged suppressants. I dragged the audio file into the recovery program. Its waveform appeared in broken gray segments. "It's corrupted," Adrian said. I wedged my camera's memory card into the reader and opened the same restoration tool I had used on his photographs. "Then stop talking and hold the light." He lowered the emergency lantern beside me. Amber light slid over his wounded hand while I matched the recording's damaged timestamps to the metadata we had already restored. 3 fragments aligned. The waveform turned blue. I pressed play. Wind hissed from the speakers, followed by Adrian's voice from years earlier. "Evan, if you ever hear this, they found the photograph." A hard strike bowed the station door inward. Adrian reached for the laptop, but I pulled it against my chest. "You said it belonged to me." His hand stopped. On the recording, he described the street exhibition where I had photographed pedestrians beneath a train platform. In the blurred background of one image stood the trafficking network's leader, meeting a clinic distributor who had later disappeared. The picture had been uploaded before I noticed either face. "They traced the camera registration to Evan," the recorded Adrian said. "So I made them trace everything else to me." The room seemed to contract around the stove's metallic ticking. Adrian had erased our messages, abandoned his old number, and let the network believe he had stolen my original files. Every silent month had been a false trail drawn away from my apartment, my work, and the places I visited. I looked at the years of photographs stored on the laptop. "You kept watching me. To see whether they were watching you," Adrian answered. Snow hissed through a widening crack beside the door. "The room in your basement?" His jaw tightened. "If they moved against you, I needed somewhere their suppressants couldn't reach you. I prepared it. I never intended to bring you there without your choice." The recording continued before I could answer. Adrian's older voice softened beneath the static. "There's another truth he deserves, even if it ruins whatever he remembers of me. I didn't disappear only because he was the witness. I disappeared because I love him, and staying close made him easier to use against me." Beside me, Adrian turned toward the barricade as if facing armed strangers required less courage than facing my silence. I caught his sleeve and forced him back. "How long?" "Long before the photograph. And you decided loving me meant choosing everything for me?" His eyes dropped to my fingers around his sleeve. "I decided keeping you alive mattered more than being forgiven." A metal tool punched through the door near the lock. Cold air knifed across the room, carrying gasoline fumes and pine. Adrian pulled free, shoved the heavy desk against the breech, then removed the station's emergency flare from its wall bracket. "The recording changes nothing outside. It changes who gets to decide." I closed the laptop, secured it inside my camera bag, and looped the strap across my body. Adrian faced me, flare clenched in his uninjured hand. Beyond him, the cracked door trembled under another impact. "Evan, when that opens, I'm giving myself up." They want the person who stole their evidence more than they want the witness. I stepped between him and the entrance. No, you've spent years making yourself the shield. My hand settled over the camera at my side, while the recovered confession burned in my mind. Now you're going to follow my plan. Another blow split the lock plate, and Adrian stared at me as the door began to open. What plan? The one where they finally learn I was never just your witness. A sharp electronic chirp cut through the hammering wind as my camera connected to the ranger station's backup transmitter. The laptop screen cast a pale rectangle across the barricade, while splintered wood scraped over the floor and diesel fumes seeped through the widening doorway. I pulled the memory card from my camera and slid it into the laptop. 4 years ago, I photographed their leader without knowing it, I told Adrian. Tonight, I'm going to photograph him knowing exactly who he is. Adrian caught my wrist. His palm was cold, his damaged suppressant scent edged with metal. They'll identify you. They already did. I opened the scheduled gallery I had created while restoring the files. It held Adrian's evidence, my original photograph, and a time-stamped message explaining why I had driven to his house after months of silence. The public link was addressed to every newsroom and federal contact Adrian had used, but its location data pointed here. Not merely to the station, to my camera. Your upload gave them documents, I said. Mine gives law enforcement a live target. The desk jumped as the lock tore free. Adrian raised the flare and moved in front of me. Stay behind me. I shoved the flare toward the station's iron stove instead. Light the chimney. They need to see us from the road. For one suspended second, he resisted. Then he struck the cap. Red fire flooded the room, hissing against frost and turning the windows into sheets of blood-colored glass. Adrian thrust the flare into the cold stove, and smoke curled up the chimney. Headlights swept through the trees. The door crashed inward. A broad-shouldered man entered first, snow melting on his dark coat, with 2 agents behind him. His gaze passed over Adrian and fixed on me. The witness comes with us. You can walk away. Adrian stepped forward and placed the evidence drive on the floor. Take me instead. I pressed the shutter. The flash bleached every face white. My camera uploaded the image before the intruder could turn away, binding his face to the coordinates, Adrian's records, and my dated photograph from years earlier. Then I hit publish. Notification tones spilled from the laptop in a bright, relentless cascade. The man lunged for it, but I kicked the station radio's severed cord across his path. Adrian seized his coat and drove him against the desk, not to rescue me, but to hold him inside the frame while I kept shooting. Federal police, a voice thundered outside. Blue light strobed between the pines as officers surrounded both roads. The intruder's agents dropped their weapons. Their leader stared into my lens while handcuffs closed around his wrists, his hidden face already multiplying across hundreds of screens. My phone vibrated. The evidence had been mirrored. The network's clinics and accounts were exposed. So was the metadata Adrian had spent years stripping from my records. Evan Hale, registered Omega. Messages flooded the screen before the officers finished clearing the room. My employer requested immediate contact. Unknown numbers demanded statements. One alert displayed my private classification beside my photograph. Adrian saw it and went still. I had saved his life without surrendering mine to the men who hunted us. Yet the world now possessed the secret I had always chosen to control. Outside, the storm thinned to glittering ice beneath the emergency lights. Adrian released the desk and came toward me, stopping before he touched my arm. Tell me what you need. I looked at the ruined doorway, then at the camera still warm in my hands. For the first time, hiding was no longer an option, and neither of us knew whether the life waiting beyond those blue lights would still have room for both of us. Spring rain whispered through the pines, tapping the repaired porch roof with a softer rhythm than the storm that had torn it apart months ago. Fresh cedar replaced the splintered doorframe, its pale grain warm beneath the porch light, and the windows spilled amber across the wet steps. I stood beside 2 suitcases and a box of camera equipment, breathing in damp earth, sawdust, and the faint trace of Adrian's natural alpha scent, clean now, no longer twisted by illegal suppressants. My former employer had never taken me back. Clients had disappeared after my Omega status spread across the internet, while strangers dissected my medical classification as if it belonged to them. But the federal case had held. The clinics were closed, the trafficking accounts frozen, and the people Adrian had spent years trying to protect were finally being contacted as victims instead of criminals. I had rebuilt my work under my own name, one photograph at a time. The front door opened before I could knock. Adrian wore a charcoal sweater with the sleeves pushed above his wrists, leaving the fading marks on his arm uncovered. For several seconds, he simply looked at the luggage. Rainwater slid from my hair and cooled the back of my neck. "You brought more equipment than clothes," he said. "The lenses earn rent." His mouth curved, but he remained behind the threshold. He did not reach for my bags. He did not tell me the spare room was ready or promise that no one would find me here. The restraint between us felt deliberate, almost ceremonial. "The repairs look good," I said. "Most of them." His gaze moved to the new frame. I left the mark by the basement latch. Inside, the old gouge my tripod had made when I broke his rule remained in the wood. Nothing waited behind that door now except storage shelves and empty hooks. Adrian had dismantled the hidden room himself. The photographs he had taken of me were gone from its walls. He had returned every print and negative in sealed boxes without asking to keep even one. "There's something you should see." He stepped aside, allowing me to enter first. Warm air touched my face. The living room smelled of coffee and fresh paint, and rain hissed against the chimney cap above a low fire. My restored photograph of the mountain ridge hung near the window. Not a surveillance image, not evidence, just the first picture I had ever chosen to give him. Adrian crossed to the kitchen counter and picked up a small brass key on a plain wooden ring. He placed it in my palm, then closed neither his hand nor mine around it. "It opens the front door, the garage, and the studio out back," he said. "The deed stays in my name unless you decide you want something different. Your room can be upstairs, beside mine, or nowhere in this house. If you leave tomorrow, the key is still yours. If you stay, it won't be because I hid the road home." The metal warmed against my skin. Months earlier, he had sacrificed every structure that kept him safe. Now he offered me one without turning it into a debt. I walked back through the doorway. Adrian's shoulders tightened as I stepped onto the porch, but he stayed where he was, hands open at his sides. I lifted the first suitcase, carried it inside, and set it on the floor. Then I returned for the second. Only when I brought in the camera box did his breath leave him in a quiet, uneven sound. "Evan," he said, "are you sure?" I shut the door against the rain and tested the lock with my new key. The bolts settled with a solid click. "I'm not here because I need somewhere to hide." I crossed the warm floor, took his hand, and guided it to the suitcase handle beside mine. "I'm here because this is where I choose to build." Adrian leaned his forehead against mine, waiting until I closed the final inch between us. Around us, cedar boards creaked, coffee cooled, and rain silvered the glass, but no locked room and no unspoken bargain remained. The first time I crossed his threshold, I came looking for the friend I had lost. This time, I turned the key myself and came home to the man I loved.